Yeah, sorry, but not when moderating, I promise. You give me the go-ahead when you think, I think we're good, right? I hope all of you online are happily in place. I think there's one more, no, a couple more people coming. For whom is this the first event of January? That would be a surprise. It's your first event of the new season. Were you sleeping up to now? Yeah. For whom is this the, oh my God, millionth? Or for whom does it feel like it's the millionth event and we're only in January? Oh, that's okay. All right. They're with us. All right. I can start. May I start, please, Seb? Perfect. So very, very good afternoon to our fabulous speakers, and a very good afternoon to, I hope you will be an equally fabulous audience. Of course, those of you here at the Brussels Press Club and those of you joining us online from the comfort of your homes and offices or your home offices. Those of you who are joining us online from Brussels, you've probably made a really good choice not to step outside because it's freezing. May I also ask you just to check that your phones are on silent? I think we are still in those early-ish days of physical events where we may forget. Thank you. My name is Katrina Sickle. Can I extend all of you a very, very warm welcome to this event? It's organised by the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, Finance Watch and New Economics Foundation. And we are here to explore the nitty-gritty of a new era for European economic governance. This is, of course, not a new, but certainly a most timely discussion, given that the European Commission recently issued an orientation paper setting the direction for the review of the European economic governance framework, including fiscal rules. Now, this next bit probably sounds like I'm talking about things you all know, but let's just reiterate, given that Europe and the world is facing a perma-crisis. That was 2022's word of the year, in terms of rising energy prices and costs of living, in terms of the stark environmental and biodiversity crises and war on the doorstep of the EU. In the next 2 hours, 5 fabulous speakers will explore with you how the EU's economic governance framework should adapt and change to allow Europe to be, and I chose these words, and I think the organisers did as well with care, sufficiently strong, sufficiently flexible, sustainable, and resilient to face these and doubtless more to come challenges. How can it be fit for purpose? And within the discussion, how do we see the role of the private and the public sector in plugging some significant funding gaps in infrastructure, in public assets, in environmental adaptation measures, and more? That's all I'm going to say for the context. There are people far more eloquent than I to talk in more detail, but on a format front, a moment ago, I said that 5 speakers will explore the topic with you. So that means you get to ask questions with a raised hand in this room into which a microphone will be put, or online, you can put it in the chat. Now, good people, you know the drill. Yes, it's Brussels. Yes, everybody has a strong and a long point of view, but please, no drawn out speeches. Can I kindly ask you to save those for the hairy canary or for the canapes and drinks that follow this event, really, or even online, #fiscal matters. If you make your intervention in the room no more than 4 sentences, I will personally send you a bottle of champagne. Sounds good? I hope so. Right, I will say more about today's eloquent speakers in a moment, but first, I would like to hand over this lectern to the director of Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung's Brussels office. Her name is Eva van der Acht, and she is going to officially open today's event. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction, Katrine. Good afternoon, everyone, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It is my honor to welcome you on behalf of the organizers to this debate on how to reform, how to rethink the European Economic Governance Framework. This is a joint event of Finance Watch, the New Economics Foundation, and the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung. Questions we would like to discuss today are: how can we, to quote the European Commission, build an economic governance framework fit for the challenges ahead? How can economic and fiscal policy help to fight climate change? How can we address the soaring costs of living? and how to further European integration at the same time. Addressing the current economic crisis, tackling the climate emergency, and ensuring social cohesion will require significant investments across Europe. In light of Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine, it is the EU's responsibility to support Ukraine to make sure Ukraine can defend itself, win the war to live in peace, and to rebuild its economy, infrastructure, and institutions. Furthermore, we have to tackle the catastrophic impacts of Russia's war on Europe and the world. It is clear that the debate on the future European economic governance framework is crucial, and that we have to take multiple crises, geopolitical threats, and global uncertainties into consideration. I am very pleased that there is so much interest in the debate and that so many experts decided to join us here in Brussels and as well as online. Please allow me to thank our partners for their excellent cooperation. I would like to thank especially Sebastian Mang from the New Economics Foundation, Ludovic Sorel from Finance Watch, and my colleague Anton Möller for their great work and efforts in organizing today's discussion. I also would like to thank our esteemed speakers for sharing their expertise with us. Last but not least, thank you, Katrina, for leading us through this discussion. And I wish us all an insightful debate, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you already for mentioning our speakers, and I will invite them subsequently to each lay out their stalls one by one. Now, during that time, of course, you can send a super concise question or shape a super concise one in your head, but I won't get to those until the second half of the event, and I will do my unutterable best to leave half an hour for that. But that's the contract between my speakers and me. They have to do their job being concise too. Look, I've literally terrorized them already. Okay, first up, to set the bar high, let's give a very warm welcome, please, to our keynote speaker, Marco Butti. He is, of course, Chief of Staff of the Commissioner for the Economy at the European Commission, and he's going to present, I hope that's what you're going to present, the main elements of the Commission's proposal. Let's see, but the floor is yours, sir. Please come and knock me off this lectern. You can give him a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Thanks, Eva. New era for European economic governance. I think very good topic, and I hope we can indeed enter into this new era together. What I'm going to do now is, to set the scene first. I think both of you, okay, Katrina, you mentioned the perma crisis, Adam Too's poly crisis, etc. So, to what extent the new economic governance that proposes the Commission help address those issues, beside setting a credible frame for coordination of economic policies in the EU, in the longer term. So, challenges for 2023, essentially four that you can that I have tried to summarize in this slide. You may agree these are the right ones or the only ones, or maybe there are many more, but certainly I think these they come to the fore quite in a quite staggering manner. Okay, first of all, stagflation risks. Second, the risk of fragmentation of financial markets. Third challenge is delivering the twin transition in the context of the current energy crisis. And finally, the fourth one that has come to the fore indeed quite prominently is the issue of competitiveness, the response to the Inflation Reduction Act of the US, which, by the way, in terms of triggering a coordinated response, is probably the most relevant of the four challenges right now in the immediate, and it will be part of the discussion certainly at the European Council in February and then in March. what is relevant here, beside the list of the challenges, is that the trade-offs are back, and are back with vengeance. I mean, if you go back beginning of 2020, when we were hit by the pandemic crisis, it was hard politically to find a common way forward, but it was not hard economically. I mean, actually, it was pretty banal from the economic viewpoint. What we had to do there, you remember, we had, okay, shock of the pandemic, lockdowns. It was clear that there was a collapse in economic activity, so we had to sustain growth and demand at the time. Second, we had entered the pandemic crisis with actually very low inflation rates, so well below the 2% of the ECB. And third, the risk of financial fragmentation was actually addressed by loosening monetary policy and QE, the PEP, etc. So actually, we lived at that particular moment in a world of no trade-offs. Now, I'm actually pushing my luck a bit on this, but by and large, this was the situation. Move forward from spring 2020 to today, and you can see here, I'm not going to elaborate on all this, but basically, for each challenge, you have to face trade-offs. And trade-offs implies, to have to make choices between two objectives. And I have not here made the links, but you have trade-offs also between the various challenges, not only within. So it is now, objectively, it is hard to design the right policy orientation. And you can see, okay, stagflation more clearly, support economic activity and taming inflation. On the financial fragmentation, we have entered the world of QT after the world of QE, and they are avoiding financial fragmentation, the undue widening of spreads. On delivering the twin transition, you have actually three trade-offs combining on fiscal sustainability, social objective, and environmental objectives. And on the competitiveness, the big discussion right now on what to do at the national level, state aid versus what to do at the European level to avoid the fragmentation of the markets. Now, it's not the object of the discussion here, but all these trade-offs bite in the short term, but if we make the right choices, they do not bite in the medium to long term. Actually, you have to address both corners of the various corners in order to find the right policy response. Question: how does the economic governance review help to lessen these trade-offs? And here, hopefully you can read it. The yellow is a little bit pale, but it's not too difficult. You have seen here, I put at each corner of the rectangle here the four challenges: stagflation, financial fragmentation, delivering twin transition, and competitiveness challenge response to the IRA. And you can see, and I put the economic governance review in the middle with arrows actually breaching to the various objectives. And you can see there, I'm not going to elaborate at length how getting it right on the economic governance review, finding consensus to move forward together would help to stem these trade-offs and address those challenges. On the stagflation, prudent fiscal stance. I think the help on supply side reforms, which also help lessen the inflationary bottlenecks. On the financial fragmentation, I think here the issue of cohesion, confidence effects are very important. Actually, if you go back again to spring 2020 with Next Generation EU, the stabilization and the confidence effect actually came from the fact that we found a cohesive way forward. Markets actually delivered we deliver stabilized message to market, which was very effective well before any single euro was actually disbursed on the next generation EU. It took another year to, through accelerated procedures. We know that, you know, it's a boat, the EU, that moves at its own speed before we disburse any single euro. But the message to the markets that we are in together, and there is a pilot, collective pilot in the plane, I think was very important. And then on the twin transition, the issue here is to actually foster investment reforms, which would help to redirect resources, private and public, towards the twin transition. And finally, on the issue of competitiveness here, the flexibility on the investment side, reform incentives help on that front. And financial fragmentation, I didn't mention it, but a gradual reduction of public debt would actually help reassure the market. So if we get it right on the economic governance review, you see that, you know, we can have a virtuous cycle which would allow to tackle these various challenges in front of us already in the very short term, and lessen the trade-offs I have mentioned before. So this is the scene setting, the current fiscal framework, and the problems. I think I focus in particular on the fiscal side. I know Agnes will talk about the macroeconomic imbalances procedure, but in the various arrows that you have seen in the previous slide, behind those arrows, yes, there are the fiscal reform, fiscal rules, but also the implementation of the macroeconomic imbalances procedure, in particular as far as the reforms are concerned. So there is now, we have a preventive arm, we have a corrective arm. You can look there what the main elements are. What are the problems that we have been facing? Essentially 6. First, complexity, a multiplicity of indicators, and which lead to indicators arbitrage. So member states coming up with the indicators, put in the focus on what suits them best. Second, the 1/20th rule on the debt reduction, on the debt algorithm. And here I have to say I plead guilty in advance, because I was one of those at the origin of the numbers. It has proven not feasible. This is you have to reduce by 1/20 in average every year from your level of debt to the 60%. So that is unrealistic pace. Third element is a pro-cyclical bias, both in good times and in bad times. So largesse in good times, and then having to restrict in bad times. This is the law of human nature. So, I mean, it's very difficult to correct it via European regulation that, you know, we usually misbehave in good times, not even personal life. But, you know, somehow the rules should help to, you know, at least partly correct this inner bias. Limited incentives for reform and investment. We have a reform clause and investment clause, but objectively they are not particularly, they don't have particular traction. Lack of ownership at the national level, which implies that rules are seen essentially as, you know, Brussels-based, you know, they are parachuted in the member states and not doing the right, you know, being owned by the political system, but also the public at large. And finally, which is a bit the result of all this, is a low enforcement of member states. Law enforcement of the rules. Member states never met, most of them, or half, never met the medium-term objectives. We never launched the debt-based EDP. So we have to correct these problems, so at least move towards that correction. How do we do that? Here is the suggested framework that we have. First of all, I put the emphasis before on national ownership. And here is how we would improve that. We would empower the member states to come forward with their own medium-term fiscal structural plans. However, based on some reference path that is designed in Brussels to see, so that these medium-term fiscal structural plans actually respond to common principles, clear common principles. This is medium-term. Then they have the annual budget that commit to follow the trajectory that has been decided for over the horizon of the plan. Member states can request longer adjustment periods, so it is the normal plan would be 4 years up to 7 years. So to have a more gradual adjustment, more gradual path of debt reduction, provided that this goes hand in hand with the right allocation of resources towards more investment, so better quality of public finances and reform and structural reforms responding to the country-specific recommendations within the European semester and to big EU policy priorities. Council endorsed the plans, and then we consider also a stronger role for national independent fiscal council. So this, let's say, chapter on more national ownership have a simplification of the rules, focus on fiscal risks. So net expenditure path rather than this multiplicity of indicators, put more emphasis on where the problems are, more grave. So essentially on the debt side. And we do away with a number of indicators which are currently part of the system, which would no longer apply. So a pretty substantial simplification of the rules. And then this goes the stronger ownership, first column, simplification, second column, goes hand in hand with stronger enforcement. So this is the idea. We are not going to change essentially the deficit-based EDP. Actually, the 3% of the treaty, which is there, and one cannot actually do away with that in the current circumstances. But also, it has had an important magnetic power and visibility. Ask when we go out here, the first person you meet in the street, what do you know about the European fiscal framework? Maybe they think you are a bit nuts, but okay, if you overcome the first impression, they will tell you the 3%. And when we had discussed with Mercosur, the idea of having a currency union in Latin America, they want to borrow that, they'll say, well, the 3%. That's even with China some years ago. So this is not going to go away. But we are going to have a debt-based EDP, which is operationalized, strengthened, and clearly it is going to be in our approach more credible. Basically, what you have is that the Commission proposes once the country has presented the fiscal structure plan, a certain path for expenditure. The Council adopts that, and then the country implements this. So here the idea is that you should stick to your commitments. More ownership means more responsibility. So you stick to your commitments, and then if you deviate from those commitments, unless it is done for good, benign reasons, because of a shock, because of external circumstances not under the control of the country, you should actually deliver that. If not, you would enter the corrective arm. So this is a bit we add also a new tool to make sure that if we have lengthened the adjustment from 4 to 7 years in exchange for investment and reforms, we control that the investment reforms are actually delivered, and this is a tool for that. Okay, we finish with one more curiosity-oriented slide, which is one that I have here. In economics, there are many trilemmas. I'm also a bit responsible for having, created some of them. I mean, you have the hard economic trilemmas like the one of Mandel-Fleming at the basis of economic and monetary. You know, this is a more evocative one, you know, so clearly is not as robust as implacable as others that we have seen. By the way, even the one of Mandela has been called into question empirically, but let's put that aside. So basically, you have a trilemma here which says that it is difficult to have at the same time three objectives, which is one, step up, foster investment reform for sustainable growth, ensure a very rapid public debt reduction, and ensure also strong national ownership, and at the end of the day, you know, domestic political stability. Combine two of the three corners, but you cannot deliver the third one. So there are different ways of getting out the trilemma, and my time is off, so I give you only the one that is the preferred and in line with the proposal of the Commission, which is we should combine incentives for investment reforms for sustainable growth, delivering that twin transition that I mentioned before, ensure national ownership and political stability, but this would imply that we have to accept a more gradual but credible public debt reduction. So you see, solution C is my preferred one. Okay, this trilemma here attributed to me, not to the European Commission, because you know, that is the name of the game. Thank you.
Just a quick question. Thank you very much. Sorry, I have a quick question. I'm going to sit down, otherwise I feel rather huge, rather tall. Just a question, because that was hilarious. That little thing that you said, you know, we all misbehave in the good times, even in our personal life. Let's take a read of the room. Who misbehaves in the good times in their personal life? Oh, I love that. You just, your hand shot up, the lady who's covering her face with a hat.
Who do not raise their hands, they lie. So, I mean, that's
you said it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Just very rapidly, this issue of smarter sanctions. What does smarter sanctions in 4 sentences look like?
Smarter sanctions, what we have seen with the current system is that we have very large financial sanctions. So 0.2% of GDP, so macroeconomically relevant, and from the budget, clearly very relevant. Now, it is very hard to sanction a sovereign state, and in particular with very sizable sanctions. And I mean, we have seen in the past, I tell you, what has happened is that when we have gone to the crunch, you know, and the issue was, you know, applying the financial sanctions, we have seen between member states private virtue and public vice or
misbehavior.
So, but no, basically what you have is that even countries which are traditionally, you know, very strong on fiscal discipline, when they come to potentially apply sanctions to others, I mean, they take the phone and call the Commission and say, yes, I understand that, yes, that is, these sanctions should be, etc. But why are you not reasonable for that? Then obviously they criticize the Commission for not having applied the sanctions. So this to say that I think large sanctions are not feasible. So what we would do, it would move towards more reputational sanctions. So something that is financially less, you know, important, less sizable, lower amounts, but that can be implemented because they are not, you know, earth-shaking, but they have an important reputational component. And we consider also other type of measures. I hesitate to call them sanctions, like, you know, you go for a minister to appear before the European Parliament and explain why you have not, you know, we have violated the rules, etc., which it brings a little bit of pressure on the finance minister. So we move to something that is more credible, even though, I mean, more, you know, handleable.
A little bit more pressure. That's you were mastered English understatement there, but that was also an Italian 4-sentence answer. I love that. No,
Okay,
I jest.
good.
I jest. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Certainly more from you. I have a bazillion questions, but it is not for me to hoover up all the time. But thank you so much for setting out your stall and, you know, looking at the proposal in more detail for that opening framework. Thank you. You may take a seat and I will call you up shortly. Okay, right. Here. Nobody dares sit in my seat, do they? I think I've terrified everybody. All right. So as I said, perhaps we can just show, I don't know if we've got a slide with all of the speakers, because I'm not going to invite them all quite yet, because the first of our remaining speakers also has slides and you'll all be craning your necks. But here you see that we have really a very, very strong setup. We have Agnès Benassi-Kéré, who is the chief economist at the French Treasury. And a member of the Bruegel board, and she was a professor at the Paris School of Economics and chair of the French Council of Economic Analysis. I could go on, suffice to say she is absolutely equipped to be on this panel. I would love to sit next to you in a brasserie or a pub, because your experience and expertise is so far from my own. So brilliant that you're here. Who else do we have? We also have the lovely Peter Stein. Look, I said the word lovely, didn't I? Financial counsellor and head of unit ECOFIN at the Permanent of the Netherlands. So before coming to Brussels, Peter did actually work at the Dutch Ministry of Finance as Deputy Director at the Inspectorate for the Budget. He's done all sorts of things earlier in his career. He did study economics. Again, that's good, because this is quite a difficult topic, but you've only been in Brussels a year and a half, I understand. So you're still kind of sort of getting to grips with the ropes. Rasmus, where are you? You're on the front row here. Rasmus Andresen, who is of course MEP and head of the German delegation in the Greens, the EFA group in the European Parliament. So he's a member of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee and also coordinator of the Greens in the Budget Committee. So plenty of things for you to bring to the party. And we also have Ludovic, I was going to say Sutter Sorel, but it's not Sutter Sorel. Oh, look, Sutter Sorel, who is a senior research and advocacy officer at Finance Watch. So this really is very much, all of this topic is his baby, very much the European Economics Governance Review. He's published lots of reports, and he was also a member of the European Commission's technical expert group in sustainable finance and involved in the creation of the EU taxonomy for sustainable activities. So that gives you a sense of who we've got. Now, Ludovic, I'm going to ask you to come up first, because as I said, you've also got slides. And after you've laid out your stall, I will then invite the rest of the speakers to come in, and you will get your moment in the spotlight to lay out your own stall. So thank you, Ludovic. Please push me off the lectern. You can give him a warm round of applause too, if you will.
So thanks, Kate. Thanks first, all of you, for coming in large number in spite of the quite technical topic. And of course, thanks for the speaker for accepting our invitation. Clearly, it's challenging for me to pass after Monsieur Bouty. There's clearly many goods in the European Commission proposal to review the European fiscal rules. But taking into account the short amount of time I have, I will only present 2 facts and 2 main proposals to maybe slightly improve the complex proposal already made. Like this, okay. Perfect, done. So first, something that will seem quite obvious for many of you, but not for all, a state is not an household. Often said that similarly to an household, a state should not spend more than its revenue. In the case of a state, taxation revenue. But in fact, a state is not an household. It is therefore not expected to manage a budget and debt like one. As a state is eternal, which is not the case of an household, of course, it does not really have to run budget surplus to be able to reimburse its stock of debt. In fact, states don't reimburse. They roll over the stock of debt. Each time new debt arrives at maturity, they issue a new one. So what really matters for the debt sustainability of a state, it's clearly partly the stock of debt, but it's also the flow of debt, which can be captured for those that know about the gross financing needs. It's mostly two things. First, how much it costs for you as a state to roll over your stock of debt. This is captured by the annual interest payment. And second, how often do you have to roll over your stock of debt? And this is captured by the average maturity of your stock of debt. These two indicators that go beyond debt to GDP allow you to have a different picture of the question of debt sustainability in Europe. So here you can see on this slide the annual interest payments, so what we call debt servicing cost in the EU. As you can see, in the 1990s, all the main countries for the euro area were between 3.5 and 11% of GDP. Nowadays, they're somewhere between 0.5 and 4%. So this is the cost of rolling over your stock of debt, to make it simple. Other part, the average maturity, how often do you have to roll over your stock of debt? We move from 3 to 9 years to 7 to 11 years in the euro area. I just wanted to point these two facts to make you understand that the dynamic of big debt is not as a dynamic of an household debt, and that debt to GDP has sometimes to be take with some distance, let's say. The second point I want to make is the fact that the current fiscal rules are unable to capture debt sustainability and are in fact mostly arbitrary in nature. It's well known that the fiscal limit embedded in the European treaties, so the 60% debt to GDP and 3% deficit, are arbitrary thresholds. They are not based on scientific evidence, and basically there is nothing that happened at 61% debt to GDP, 70, 80, 90. And if we have this number, in fact, it's because they are broadly the average of public debt back in the day in 1990s when we decided to establish the Maastricht Treaty. But more fundamentally, debt to GDP is not the appropriate indicator to capture debt sustainability. Let me show you an example here. Here you can see the government debt to GDP in 2020, so it's a very special year. For many countries, the country in red, country outside of the EU, in blue, inside the EU, and you see the level of 60% debt to GDP, the reference value in the annex to the treaty, the European Treaty. So the big question could be, as you can see, many of these countries are far above 60%, but does it mean that the stock of debt is unsustainable and that there is something to do, that they really need to cut their debt? At least it's not the opinion of the financial markets. Here on this slide, what you can see is the credit rating of Japan, United States, France, and Ukraine. As you can see, Japan, 256% debt to GDP in 2020, United States, 160, that's changed nowadays, France, 124. They all have excellent credit rating from the Moody credit rating agency. But Ukraine, and I want to say first that these are numbers from 2020 and also for the credit rating, Ukraine had debt to GDP below 60%, was around 50, but still the assessment from the financial market, from the credit rating agency, was that it was maybe not, it was risky to invest in their public debt. What I want you to keep in mind with that is just that there are not only debt to GDP, there are other indicators that capture that. And what credit rating agencies, in fact, are doing, so we check, Finance Watch is mostly composed of former investment banker and the rest, and we check the methodology of all the credit rating agencies. And when you take a look into how they analyze the credit worthiness, let's say, of a country, the most important indicator for them is the economy of the country, its size, its complexity, its ability to be resilient to shock, its growth prospect. And then they have other pillars of analysis, among which you have clearly public finance. But in public finance, debt to GDP is one indicator. The other one are the one I showed you before, debt servicing cost, average maturity, and plenty of other. If I want to say you that is because one of the contentious issue about the proposal of the Commission is that they suggest to allow country to come with country-specific debt pathway based on debt sustainability analysis. From a Finance Watch perspective, we think it's an excellent proposal that's really based on the literature, the state-of-the-art knowledge about debt sustainability. And we think it's really something that should be promoted because the debt sustainability analysis, in fact, take all these indicators into account, try to understand the interaction, also apply some shock to them. So it's some sort of stress testing for public finance. And just wanted to start by at least supporting this proposal, which is challenged by some member states at this stage. Now I will come to the 2 points, and I will try to be as short as possible. The first point is that ensuring debt sustainability requires not only to look at debt dynamic based on past value, it's basically what debt sustainability are doing in general, but also to have a forward-looking approach to future risk. Let's take an example to make it a bit more clear. Let's take climate-related risk. There is a growing amount of evidence that climate change will affect our economy, that some feedback loop exists between the economy and the financial system, and that all of this will require a different level, different way, the states to do something, and it will, let's say, lead to important costs for public budget. I don't really have the time to go to the different number of this risk, but I just want you to know that this notion of the risk of climate change on public budgets is called climate-related fiscal risk, and there is an institution that started to assess this risk. What you can see here is the estimation by the Office for Budget Responsibility in the UK of the impact that climate change could have on the UK budget by 2050. They made it and run different scenarios, including different type of change, reform, technologies, and arrive at a conclusion, for example, in the late action scenario, that climate change could lead to as much as plus 45% of debt to GDP by 2050. It's clearly not the only risk facing Europe. I just wanted to put an emphasis on the fact that only looking at debt dynamic in the short run is not enough. We really have to take into account what could happen in the long run. And therefore, we have to do 2 things. As part of the review, there will be a new mandate for what we call the EU Independent Fiscal Institution. We think, as Finance Watch, but with many other organizations, think tank, and civil society organizations as Climate Action Network, that they should be required to, all the independent fiscal institutions at national level should be required to produce this fiscal risk analysis. But just doing analysis is not enough. So second point is the necessity to do precautionary investment to reduce this risk. So continuing on the example of climate change, for the EU to achieve its own environmental objective, it of course needs reform. But not only, it also needs to raise an additional 450 billion per year. So it's between 3 and 4% of EU GDP, the so-called green funding gap that you can see here in the estimation by the Commission in 2020. The number is a bit higher nowadays with Power EU. And this funding gap has to be bridged by private actors, sure, but also by the public. There is a different role for all of them, and the public can also help to activate some private investment. The public has still to spend more or less among something like 2% of EU GDP. But other investment gap exists, as you can see here, public investment gap and many others. I don't really have the time to go in it, but more or less we might have between 3 and 4% of GDP of investment need in Europe nowadays. If states were us all, they would probably have to cut spending to be able to invest and to bridge this funding gap. But the state is not an us all. As all this investment will benefit multiple generations, financing them via debt is the legitimate way to spread their costs among all the benefiting generation. The Commission proposal is already a big improvement as it creates more incentive and leeway for quality investment and reform. But it maintains the arbitrary 3% deficit limit that remains, and it might make it impossible for some countries to bridge this funding gap, at least in the absence of common European fiscal capacity. So I will finish here. In the absence of debt sustainability risk, there is for us little rationale in applying arbitrary constraint to debt finance quality green investment and make the EU economy stronger, more resilient, and sustainable. They should therefore be excluded from deficit and expenditure limit because they improve long-term debt sustainability. Thank you.
One question, because bless you, you had to really race at the end because there's too much to say, isn't
Yeah,
there? In too little
way too
time,
much.
like always. I think we are all aware of that being in Brussels. There is always too much to say in too short a time. However, very interesting. Just one question, picking up on what was said, if you caught it, because it was quite fast at the end. You talked there about the possibility of excluding some categories of spending, which I understand. But on the other hand, I guess you might get the question, you know, would some member states perhaps abuse this system? You might get some kind of creative accounting there. How would one, be careful to avoid that in a nutshell?
Okay, it's a very interesting question indeed. Thank you. It's indeed, we had discussion with different PEM rep, different person in Brussels, Commission, the rest, and this has been raised often. In fact, what you're asking is the quality of public finance, the quality of investment, how to ensure that if we give more leeway to member states, it will be used to actually do the proper investment. But in fact, the solution is quite simple. What the Commission has done now is to replicate the logic of the RRF, to apply that to the fiscal rules, to give more leeway to member states. And the process is basically member state propose a plan where with a country-specific debt pathway, reform and investment. Then you have technical assessment by the Commission, a service criteria to analyze, and then a political decision by the Council. The same thing could be applied to this question. You could have the authorization for member state to submit a list of future-oriented expenditure of green investment of whatever to the Commission that could check, therefore, if they comply with different important criteria like do no significant harm. First, the Commission could do a debt sustainability analysis to be sure that the member state can afford to do that. You can have ensuring that there is respect of the EU objective also in this investment. And therefore, the same way that for the rest of the plan, if the Commission approve the plan with the quality investment ex ante, then it's up to the ECOFIN Council to decide and to say yes or no to the plan, including all this investment that has been excluded from the limits. And therefore, you avoid all this thing normally.
And also, and something else that may come up, there is also this focus, I think, that we spoke about certainly before this event on the kind of quality rather than the quantity of investment. But I will park that there just for the moment, only because I need to allow all of these other good people to air their thoughts and then make sure that I leave time for the audience. But thank you so very much. In fact, you can sit in now, can't you? Yes, I'm going to move. I'm going to invite everybody to come to stage, and then I'm going to give you all the opportunity. Those we have not yet heard from are 3 other speakers to speak. But do sit in. I mean, do sit in so that our audience can see you, and then one by one, I will ask you to expound. Come. So, I think we've got... Okay, you know how to use these microphones, don't you? Yes, you do. You sort of have to really use them at your chin. So who do we have next? We have Agnès, please. Agnès Benassi-Kéré, Chief Economist at the French Treasury. Do you want to speak from here? Are you happy to speak from here? Yep, over to you.
Thank you for this.
Thank you so much.
So briefly, I think that this proposal from the Commission is really a good starting point for the discussion. As you've seen with the presentation, have you seen from the presentation by Marco?
Just a minute.
Oh.
Yeah, you're good? Okay, beg your pardon. You can hear? Yes, perfect. Forgive me. Go ahead.
Okay, so the presentation is based, as you've seen, on sound geometry, at least. And so more seriously, so the equation is extremely difficult. So you have to make a balance between different objectives. And I think it's already, it goes already a long way. The balance between differentiation and common methodology, the balance between fiscal adjustment and investment. We know that the previous round of fiscal adjustment has been very detrimental to investment. So we need to be very careful about that. And obviously the debt to GDP ratio, you can work on the numerator of it, you can work on the denominator of it, hence investment and reforms makes sense. And this is the correct, so I agree with the focus on the debt to GDP and the idea of recovering some leeway to for the next crisis. So the idea is to build up buffers. Hence, so I agree with Ludovic when he's Ludovic here when he says that debt to GDP ratio so we have higher levels, obviously, but what is problematic is the dynamic of it. So for it to expand every year after year, so there really needs to be, and this is a long process. And I think the proposal makes also a good balance between the short-term adjustment. So in your final presentation of the trilemma, your personal view was it's better to focus on investment plus ownership, and if you need a little more time to do the adjustment, this is fine. So I think this goes a long way. Now, if I want also to say that what is the alternative? So coming back to reversing to all rules is probably not a viable option. And we need to keep this in mind when we discuss the new rules. You've talked about the 1/20th debt rule, which is obviously the most problematic. But we know you've given the long list of the undesirable features of the old rules, and coming back to them also would be not only non-credible but not fit for purpose. I think that the idea of turning to an operational expenditure rule would also fix the pro-cyclical feature of existing rules, and I think it's smart also to define the adjustment path in terms of structural adjustment and a reduction in debt to GDP ratio. And then when you move to operational rule, then to move to an expenditure rule net of discretionary tax decisions, which means that in the upturn, in the upside of the cycle, this is where governments have failed, and it puts some pressure on governments when we are on the upside of the cycle. So this is good. And in terms of the old classification between rules versus discretion, I can come back to a graph I made. So you have on the one hand one size fits all, so 3%, 60%. By the way, this is not completely arbitrary. There's a link between the two. If you have a nominal growth of 5% and that to GDP ratio of 60%, then 3% is perfect. So you could play around this, but this is not the game today. So on the one hand, the one size fits all rule. On the opposite, you have pure discretion, so no rule at all. And in between, you have a number of solutions that have been proposed. And in a sense, currently we have common rules with flexibility. So it's kind of top-down approach, and you have the vademecum of the Commission explaining the flexibilities. And what the Commission proposes is a little trick in a sense. It's doing the same common rule with flexibilities, but rather than a bottom-up, top-down approach, it's a bottom-up approach. And I think this changes very much the ownership issue. The idea that governments would themselves propose a path and a pack of fiscal adjustment, investments, reforms. So I think a small trick can make a big difference. However, of course, the evil is always in the details. The fact that the Commission first proposes a path, then gives, in a sense, it returns to the top-down approach, in a sense, because this is the rule, and then, well, you can deviate, but then the markets will know it, and so you cannot, in fact, you cannot really deviate, in a sense. I think also that we need to keep in mind that fiscal rules will never be a complete contract. So you cannot think of all possibilities, and whether you like it or not, you always need to have some flexibility around the rule and adaptations, escape clauses, and so this is also something that needs to be clarified. Maybe what happens when there's a new government coming, so is the new government asked to endorse the path of the previous one? So how will it work? Now, to be short, I also wanted to say that So the new rule is also smart in connecting the path to debt sustainability assessment. So first of all, maybe the keyword sustainability is maybe worked on, because it's not a full DSA like the IMF is doing. It's a part of the sustainability agenda. So it's in terms of shocks, so stress tests and also stochastic simulations. And we should not go for something automatic from this exercise to this is the path that comes out of the computer, and this would be the reference. This would be really problematic. The IMF doesn't do that. So we need to be careful about that. And then also in terms of ownership, I already had a hearing about the proposal of the Commission with the National Parliament. And when it comes to stochastic DSA, it's not the easier part to explain to the members of Parliament. So I think we also need to work. I think it's a great idea, but difficult to communicate. So there's a need for a buffer in between the stochastic exercise, statistical exercise, and the past. Finally, so you said at the beginning, and I was happy with that I'm fond of the macro imbalances procedure, which is also part of the proposal, although it comes quite late, and not much detail about it. So the macroeconomic imbalance procedure, for those who don't know that, it was introduced after the euro area debt crisis, because some countries like Spain and Ireland were severely hit by the crisis despite having fiscal surpluses. So there was something else in this crisis. So the starting point was extremely good. And then it became a bit complex and not really binding. So we should keep in mind that, of course, we have new challenges, but all generation crises can still strike back. And also we have spillovers, and spillovers within the euro area are not only fiscal spillovers, there are all kinds of spillovers. So there's still a case for this MIP procedure. And so I would encourage just the Commission to even push this topic up in the proposal and make it more symmetric with a fiscal adjustment path. And it can also help devising smart fiscal adjustment paths. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just check in. You are aware you are still in listening mode. There's quite a bit to get out, but I'm going to prevail upon you to remain in listening mode before I take any questions, because I want to hear from our other two speakers. I have one question for you, Agnes, before I pass. May I prevail upon you for your patience, please, just to create a moment between Agnes and Peter. I want to just come back to this issue, which has already been mentioned, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act. So we've got this, you know, Ursula von der Leyen has announced the Net Zero Industry Act, and that in theory competes, you know, with the US and the IRA and supports green tech in Europe. So the US has put a lot of money on the table, 400 billion. Is the EU able to compete without harming the single market? That's the question. Do you think more flexible rules could support those efforts and that aim? And again, how would you view kind of a new fiscal approach that supports you know, green industrial policy? Now, this is insane because I'm asking you to comment in a nutshell. I'd rather come back to you in fullness, but if I can have your top lines on that just for the moment. Yes, it's a challenge, but it's got to be done. I'm very happy for you to fill in some gaps later, but first headline feedback on that, if you will.
Okay, so I think about RIA, in a sense, this just confirms the challenges that were mentioned by Marco. The fact that we face very strong challenges in terms of the transition and the industry that needs to back the transition. of course, it's not just about, and we should avoid a race for subsidies. Big companies can very well play this game. We have a trade policy that has been reinforced. It needs to be used, not necessarily vis-a-vis the US, but in general, it needs to be used within the WTO rules. And also, there is a need to think about what redirecting existing funding pockets that are still available for the member states to address these issues. And we also need to think about how to make the transition the most efficient. And it's not just about more funding. It's not just about more subsidies to the private sector. It's also about resilience, how to diversify our supply chains. It's all this. So it's much beyond what we are discussing today, which is the fiscal adjustment. Thank you.
So may I turn to you, Peter, when we had a brief exchange before. So I think everybody knows, it's been very clear, the Dutch government and the communication that you put out there with Spain. And now we're talking about this change, in certain members of the government. Is that going to follow through? Let's hear what your stance is and of course, reflect upon, take into account what you've heard from your fellow speakers. Over to you.
Thank you. I think a review of the economic governance review, that's factually the thing we're going to do. What's the way forward for the Stability and Growth Pact? And first of all, thanks for all the organizations making this possible. It's an honor to be here. I think it's the right time to have the discussion. There will be lots of discussions between governments, Eurogroup, ECOFIN in the next couple of months. Thanks to the Commission, the cabinets, Mr. Booty, of course, but also the staff of DG ECFIN for all the hard work they did in preparing this recent communication. Already since quite a while, since 1992, the Maastricht Treaty was signed. We all try to find what is the right set for economic governance. Step by step, we are improving the system. We started with limitation of government deficits and debts, strengthening surveillance, coordination, a 6-pack, a 2-pack, and now the SGP review. And I would like to say the Dutch government is constructive about modernizing the SGP, because the current framework is not a goal in itself. It's a mean to achieve sustainable debt levels and upward convergence. And I think Mr. Booty presented quite some failures. For example, there are still quite a couple of countries with too high debt levels, and the rules, I agree, are quite complex. So a year ago, the Dutch government, a new Dutch government started with a coalition agreement, and there it was explicitly stated, we approach a modernization of the Stability and Growth Pact constructively when this is aimed at debt sustainability and upwards economic convergence. In the above, we make effective enforcement a requirement. So debt sustainability, upward economic convergence, effective enforcement. These are the 3 words which are for the Dutch government important. A common Spanish-Dutch paper in April 2022 was a result, step by step, to sometimes quite different countries tried to bring other countries together. And I'm happy that several elements of that paper have landed in the communication. So what's the opinion of the Dutch government? In short, we see some good proposals, but we need some additional safeguards. But I think it's a good idea to start with the positive elements. First, we support the aim to increase national ownership by country-specific plans, by strengthening the national fiscal institutions. Second, we think that a stronger focus on debt sustainability risk could be a way forward. Third, we are positive about the use of expenditure ceilings. We use these rules already for quite a while in the Netherlands, and we think they helped us to have a more anti-cyclical budget system. Fourth, We also like the idea of coherent national fiscal plans that take into account reforms, investments, and debt development. And of course, we still think it's good to have limits for deficit and debt that they remain at 3% and 60%. So are we there yet? No, we need some clarifications and safeguards. And let me cluster them along 4 points: debt sustainability, transparency, good national plans, and strengthening compliance and oversight. First, debt sustainability, as I said, should be at the heart of the framework. We are at this moment not convinced that the current proposal would lead to sufficient debt reduction for countries with high and medium debts. We think the framework is served by a minimum numerical debt reduction target that serves as a backstop to ensure sufficient debt reduction. Second, the process from start to end, from Commission to Council, should be transparent. The bigger role of the DSA by the Commission requires full transparency, predictability, and stability of debt sustainability assessments. The DSA and its translation into reference path should be possible to replicate. This could improve incentives through risk-based pricing by financial markets as well. There is a risk that this DSA is a new black box, and I am convinced, we are convinced we should avoid it. Regarding the national plans, thirdly, we need some assurance too. It's important that only additional investments and reforms that contribute directly to debt sustainability or economic convergence should be ground for more leeway. So no double counting of reforms which are already in the RRPs. As regard to the fiscal plan, the Commission proposes a 4 to 7 years budgetary adjustment phase. That seems rather long. One could say that 3 to 5 years should be sufficient. A longer period risks backloading of measures that reduce debt levels. The fourth point, strengthening compliance and oversight. We think we need clear rules to secure a transparent and consistent implementations of the rules, respect to assessment of the plans, openings of EDPs, EDP recommendation, the use of relevant factors, and application of escape clauses. Transparency, really important. The second regarding this is we believe European Fiscal Board should be given a larger role to improve checks and balances on the EU level. The European Fiscal Board could assess the compliance with the rules, which should be considered by Commission and Council. So we are positive and we need a little bit more safeguards, but I think now is the moment to make progress, and progress is really needed. At the end of this year, the economic escape clause will end, and member states have to prepare the budget for 2024. And in these preparations, it's good, and they need to know what our common rules will be. Thank you. And we look forward to the discussion, and we really hope we will make good steps in the coming months.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a quick comeback on that, if I may. This issue, the debt sustainability and the funding gaps. And also you said there, you are not unhappy with the 3 and the 60. You are, particularly concerned, perhaps you said debt sustainability has to be at the very heart of the framework. There's a concern with those with higher debt or without perhaps, showing that possibility to reduce that debt. But if I come back to what we heard from Ludo there and come back and link a question there, it is a percentage that does go back a long way to another time that is quite decades old. What about some of the suggestions that you heard there from Ludo, and also this issue about the context, the investments that need to be taken to tackle the climate crisis, and the fact that if we think too short term, that also is just going to bring so many problems down the road for that very reason. So do you understand that request for flexibility?
I think the Commission's brought into the debt sustainability and the analysis that makes it really, the Commission brought into the debt sustainability analysis, I think, That's one step. I think the national plans and the possibility to include reforms and investment in the plans and to make that a full plan works together as well. And I think there are always more needs in society, more wishes to spend money on than money is available. So always countries should prioritize. And that's difficult. And we also tried ourselves to do. And I think with the framework which is now on the table, there is a possibility to do it as well.
Thank you very much. We'll leave things there. And just to say, we will hear now, you've been incredibly patient, Rasmus, we'll hear from you. I'll have a little bit of chat with these good people, and then we can bring in some questions from the floor. And I would also like to give them the opportunity to come back. I know particularly Marco, there's been some questions and some comments thrown your way, which I need to give you the opportunity to come back on. So if I use my abacus, I know the maths is hard to crowbar in a bazillion questions from you and let us kind of just let some of these discussions play out. So I'm going to try and strike that balance. But first of all, Rasmus, you've been so very patient. Now, interestingly, can I just say in this position paper from the Greens and EFA, what's written here, which is not a word that's come up thus far, is moving away from a narrow vision of EU economic governance based on mistrust, means that we view rules at EU level not as a constraint, but as an enabling condition to orient national budget towards the pursuit of commonly identified EU policy objectives. So interesting there, this whole issue of trust and how one manages that. But let me first let you expound to the audience. But I'm very interested in that, because all of this, as we hear, is all about the conversation towards, and I think if I go back to what Marco said, when he said there are all these policy trade-offs that bite in the short term, less in the long term, he said if we can find some move towards a consensus, we can deal better with those policy trade-offs, hence my use of the word more trust. But over to you first. Thank you.
Thanks. And also thanks for the invitation and for organizing this event. I think it's, as you already, Peter, also pointed out, it's really the right time to, I would say, start a public conversation, not just within the council, but also in a broader public, because this is really maybe sometimes a bit tough to discuss, because it's about finance, it's about fiscal rules. And I mean, some of you said already that, like, if you're going out to the street, you're asking people, then they are mentioning the 3%. I think in my district, nobody will mention anything because they don't understand and they doesn't seem to be interested in the topic. But there is a lot of political relations to actually what is important also for the current context we're living in. And that's also where I would like to start, because I mean, we are discussing this in a very challenging economic situation. We are discussing this with still a war ongoing in Ukraine, with a lot of financing questions also linked to the war, besides of other maybe also more important elements. But still, there is also an economic dimension in it. We are discussing this where we still are facing the climate crisis. We are discussing this where we are still experiencing a lot of inequality all around Europe, but also at the global stage. So we can see there are a lot of arguments for why we need strong and also more public investments, and some of you already pointed that out also in concrete figures, so I don't want to repeat. And what I really think we need to do is to find also a new definition of what sustainability also in fiscal policy actually means, because this is not just about debt sustainability and sticking to 3 or to 60% or to both of it. This is about how our society should work and what kind of needs we have and what kind of role also the public, the member states, but also the European Union should play in this. And I think that this is quite different than like the debate had been for 5-6 years or even in the 90s ago. And I think there are good reasons for why a bigger reform is necessary, and why I think that still from the perspective of a more progressive group in the European Parliament, the proposal we are having at the table right now from the Commission is a step, but is not good enough to face the challenges. So what I would like to start out by saying is that looking into the Stability Growth Pact and how the Stability and Growth Pact actually is constructed right now, we can see a lot of problems linked to this. Some of them you already mentioned. Basically, they are the rules are not working because they are like not enforced in many of the member states, and there are good reasons for this. Not because member states are like not interested in it, but because there are some of the rules who gives limitations to the member states in economic situations they can't face any longer. And to change this, and to change this also in a way that we are actually like also talking about sustainable investments, both when it comes to the greening, but also when it comes to social infrastructure, for example. This is what I think the reform should live up to, and where I think that the Commission is quite good in explaining the challenges, but looking into the concrete measures, they are lacking a lot behind. And I'm not talking about what I think is necessary. Some of the member states are more talking about what is possible from their perspective, but I really think that at this stage, we still also need to talk about what is possible, what is necessary, and then afterwards talk about what is possible and where limitations maybe also are. But this is like something I think is the most important thing, to boost sustainable investments, to have a clear definition of what that means, both on the green side and on the social side. The second one, I think, is really important, is the question on governance, on accountability, on democratic scrutiny, where I still think that looking into what the Commission had communicated until now, looking into what member states are communicating on this one, I really think there are still some open questions where we need to find answers. As Greens in the Parliament, we are fully supportive of more flexibility. The rules like they are now are not working. And one of the reasons for this is also that there is not enough flexibility to enforce the rules and to take into account the current situation, economic situation, member states, but also the EU is in. But on the other side, this also needs, of course, to be followed up by comparing, for example, comparability, comparing also the situation in different member states to find clear criteria on the enforcement side. And there I really think that the proposal of the Commission is not clear enough, and there is still a lot of room also for maneuver and for like concretizing it before like the legislative chambers, let's put it like this, in the EU can vote on a proposal. And my last point is maybe more linked also to the question if we are like dealing with the nationalization or a European approach when it comes to fiscal policy. And what we could also hear in some of the statements made by the colleagues here on the panel earlier, this is a lot about the national situation and putting a framework forward member states can deal with their national budget. And this is basically what the rules are about. So that's true. But on the other side, if it should have a meaning to have also like European fiscal policy where the fiscal rules, the Stability and Growth Pact is one element of it, then we also need to see what's the European approach in this. I mean, for me, it's important to have like fair rules, transparent rules, rules that give also member states maybe with a tougher economic situation, a better possibility also to address some of the challenges. But on the other side, I would also like to see a much more European approach, which means also that we also need to strengthen, for example, the possibility for investments at the European level for European projects, common European projects, so that we can also like enforce the challenges, fiscal challenges we are facing together. And there, I think that elements, and we didn't discuss this now because this is not part formally of the proposal, but this is part of the conversation, at least looking into the EU response on the Inflation Reduction Act. We also need to address, for example, the issue on the European fiscal capacity, things like this. I think at the end, we will end in a situation where some member states will be more in favor of flexible fiscal rules, Some of them would love to see an investment fund, and some others, looking to France or to Germany, would love to have a reform of the state at both. But at the end, we need to have different elements fitting all of Europe with all the complexity and diversity we are also having, like when it comes to the economic situation. And this is why I think this also needs to be addressed. Also in the panel here, because this is like part of the conversation. But I'm really looking also forward to the debate, and I really think that one of the most important points is also to get into the debate and also to push for more ideas, and so that our perspective also in the debate will be much broader, and there is a kind also of public pressure to get some things done. I would like to see, and maybe some others as well.
So the debate, again, it's all a question of time. And I don't know if this is working, but I hope you can hear me. We're in a small room. It may be that we go a few minutes over, and I hope that I can prevail upon you thus. Thus far, may I just ask, because there's been a lot of content come your way, and I need to just stay just a moment longer with these good people before coming to you. Who in this room has a burning question that they feel hasn't yet been covered by what they've heard, or provoked, that has arisen because of what they heard? Or are we doing our job, not me actually, are they doing their job so well that at the moment you're cool to be in listening mode? Who's got a question up their sleeve that we would need to come to in a moment? You do, but not the whole room. We're not really frustrating people. Is it something that needs to be asked now because it needs to be elucidated from what has already been shared, or can it wait? It can wait. God, you're generous. Thank you so much. It's not what... Yeah, he says, well, yeah, you're a politician. That's why you say the words, you shouldn't commit to that. Okay, out of interest, and again, perhaps this is a little bit of a simplistic throw out to take the temperature of the room. This 63, not 63, this 360 or 63 or 360 or whatever, who sort of, from the reading around, from who you represent, favors that? Let's not mess with that. That's a good place to be. But raise your hands, and then we'll have a look at who sort of thinks we absolutely need greater flexibility. We need to find greater flexibility. I mean, aside from the treaties, aside from unanimous decisions in the council, forget it. Who looks for greater flexibility? So for whom is that not such a big issue? There are other things that are more of a big issue in the reform of this framework. For whom is it not a big issue, this 360? I need to distinguish. I think we know, okay, 3 or 6, true that. Okay, let's just look at the 60. You're right. You're right. You can tell that I didn't study what you did, can't you? For whom is it not such a big issue, this 60? For whom is it highly important and you want to have more conversation around it? And everybody else in this room are specialists in Belgian pralines or what, or at the wrong event, I take it. Okay, all right. Can I just keep it on this side? I'm very well aware that you have a question. The first thing I want to do, and I have a few questions of my own, I didn't know whether I could draw you further on German government position. I mean, you've touched upon it, but you need to keep it short though. Yeah. Well, no, I just want to see, there's lots of conversations going around. These good people are well aware that there's lots of, you know, and I didn't know whether you wanted to share any more of that or some of those conversations, or. Yes, the linked to this particular topic in the German government, because the German government, as we know, does have a lot of influence. The German government is followed by other member states. Therefore, I would be curious, in a nutshell, to hear if there's anything else that you would want to share on that.
No, I can do this. I mean, it's not a big secret that, like, in the German government, there are quite different positions on this. I mean, I'm member of the Greens in the European Parliament. Thankfully, I do not represent the German government, but the Greens in the European Parliament, which is much easier. But of course, in our party, with our colleagues in the government, we agree on a lot of concrete elements of what I already pointed out as the Green position. On the other side, we have the Liberals with a quite different position, and the discussions are still ongoing. And I would say that it will depend a lot on the concrete proposal at the end and what actually is in it. I think that Germany is opening a bit up on the issue of investments, especially green investments. I mean, for many years, Germany had said basically no to everything linked to the Stability and Growth Pact, and now they are saying we are open in discussing it. We are like ready also to listen to others, but where this will end, it's quite interesting. But I fully agree. It's important because I mean, like, there will be no reform of this without the German government. That's for sure. And what we are actually waiting for is that once our chancellor will take a clear stance on this, and then maybe this can also open up the debate a bit.
Because a little bit, can I just say what we talked about? You said, the Dutch government has opened up about this from being, a little bit in the same, in the same vein previously, and now there is more going towards. Is that how you would also, does that resonate for you?
I would say that the Dutch government is really looking, we see the problems with the current system. We think it's good to start a discussion. We are really constructively doing it. And we put together with Spain some suggestions on the table. We are really happy it's in the Commission proposal. And as I said, maybe we are sometimes a little bit like Germany, but we are open constructively doing into discussion, but we need some safeguards. And maybe the German Minister of Finance, but I cannot think for him, is a little bit tougher on the safeguards before starting the constructive discussion. But we see that there need to be some changes. We are happy the Commission put the proposals forward, but as I try to make clear, we are not there yet, and we have some points we either need see more clarification or more safeguarding. Thank you.
On that note, thank you. That's a nice segue. I'm going to leap over you two, forgive me, just momentarily, and come to you, Marco, because I think there is it would be good to hear from you I know it's a huge ask, in as concise a way as possible. But if I look at some of the things that our speakers did emphasize, you called for a better definition in fiscal policy. You talked about sustainability on both of those fronts. And I think you said, listen, greening and social infrastructure, Commission explains well, but I'm not so sure about the measures to implement, whether they're quite all there. We also had some comments from a French colleague there talking about, well, has it really changed from top down to bottom up? Is there really room for discussion? What happens when a new government comes in? Does it have to endorse the previous plans? And then there was certainly a comment there about the DSA. We need to be a little bit careful. And sometimes I believe you said it's a challenge to explain it internally. Nationally. So perhaps you could come back, not on everything, but make some clear comments on just a few of those areas, if you will, as concisely as possible. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, let me thank the speakers. I think there was a large degree of convergence. I mean, I'm used to committees, so this one is almost a piece of cake. And in short, I mean, should you lock us in a nearby room here without sandwiches, I think we would come out by the end of the evening with an agreed proposal. So that is, so if this is a state of play, either we are not a representative sample, or I think the Commission has put forward something that is a good basis to work on. On the various points, I think taking 1 point per what you mentioned, Katrina, then 1 point per speaker. I think on the on Ludovic, yes, I mean on the considering different categories of spending, excluding, etc. I think you made the point, but then you gave it the solution that the Commission actually put forward. Or very close to that, because we do not exclude a category of spending, also because you want to, if you start to highlight what is the good spending, what is very valuable spending, what is strategic spending, etc., you start to to go in all directions. Very difficult to. So in a sense, some diversification is possible, considering the European priorities and country-specific recommendations, and member states can come forward with their plans and argue for, let's say, a special treatment of some spending. Not that you exclude them, because you have to finance them anyway, but you could allow a more gradual debt reduction. And you mentioned the RRF as an example. And here, I mean, in a sense, what we have here is the RRF approach, where instead of having, and it is a much more powerful instrument, money coming with it, it is a bit more, it's more time, more gradual adjustment. Now, on Agnes, I think we have tried to marry a bottom-up approach with some, top-down, which implies the bottom-up coming from the member states have to respect some commonly agreed principles and criteria. We know that certain countries would like very much the top, others they like very much the bottom. And I think what we came forward in the communication, which is this sequence that I have presented in the slide, with the communication, the Commission kicking the process, but with reference paths, not with firm proposal that member states can take in turn and come up with the same or different. I think is something which I personally believe is going to be very close to the landing zone eventually. Now, on Peter, again, I think you mentioned the Dutch-Spanish paper, and if you look at the spirit of the Commission proposals, very much in that line, at least in terms of the broad coordinates. You think not sufficient debt reduction. I think there my plea for having a gradual but credible debt reduction, I think, is a very important element. And I warn against trying to invent new algorithms for replacing the 1/20th. I mean, my very long experience lead me to the conclusion that algorithms are intelligent ex ante and bound to be stupid ex post. So that is, I think, what that's why we do not tie our hands in terms of a new formula. Now, the Rasmus and the point of Agnes on the new government coming, I mean, we quote in the communication, Katina, you mentioned yourself, objective circumstances, which would bring the possibility to review. Clearly, the plans and the adoption by the Council is based on EU priorities, country-specific recommendation principles. So, per se, the simple change of government is not something that would lead to necessarily to change. If there are changes, we have to go through the process of adopting a new plan. So it means the Council will have to give the agreement. Rasmus, yes, I think let me say one thing for you. I mean, you mentioned what is not there, and it is very important. I mean, is the center of fiscal capacity. I have to say, personally, very attached to that. I have worked and written a lot on that, on center of fiscal capacity, on European public goods. We have tried, and we are aware this is an issue. We decided not to overcharge the boat at this stage in order not to derail the process and in a sense give a good excuse, since the issue is controversial. I understand you like it a lot, I do as well, but not everybody does. So the risk was that if we put that on top and as part of the package, then the risk is that it would sink the whole exercise. So I think I personally think that it's useful, important. I think it can be designed in a way actually to strengthen a center of fiscal capacity, to strengthen by eligibility conditions also the credibility of the rules. But I think the Commission, in its wisdom, decided not to go there. Keyword. White is okay. Rasmus doesn't think so, but okay. You see that Okay, I think a key issue here, you mentioned Katrina before. I think the key word is trust. So rebuilding trust is key in the whole exercise. Now, let me conclude then with the since it's not part of the governance discussion, but it has come up and myself put it in one of the corners of my figure. So which is competence response to IRA, etc. I think we have two issues here. And the Commission will come forward, by the way, with a communication on 1st of February, feeding the February European Council, which is going to discuss this. Then it will come, I think, in a more specific way on the March European Council, with more specific proposals. I think there are two issues that we have to safeguard here. One, the integrity of the single market. So the issue here of state aid, loosening without any considerations, and I think it would be very, very dangerous. So that is integrity of the single market is key. That's why I think any controlled review of the state aid framework, temporary state aid framework, will have to go hand in hand with, I think, a common element that would reassure that there is a EU component and not only differentiations based on depth of fiscal pockets. And here, the President of the European Commission has mentioned since the beginning of the crisis, over 600 billion state aid adopted. Over 3/4 of that from two countries alone, Germany over half, and France, I think overall 78%. So we cannot have put in peril the single market on that. And second point, with on the response to IRA, we have a strong interest in keeping our continent open. We are, we depend much more on the others. We export more. We would like to become more resilient. I think more indigenous growth, but we will remain inevitably in the global system. So I personally like more, let's say, made with Europe than rather made in Europe, emphasizing the, let's say, the biunivocal relations with the others and value chains in which we do not unilaterally depend on others, but the others depends on us.
Using this, but I'm not sure it makes a huge difference to you. I'm going to come to you in just a moment. I'm just going to come to Ludo first because you are one of the organizers. So you were doing two things there. You were nodding sagely, and you also looked like Rodin's thinker at one point. So I felt I needed to specifically come to you, whether it's to come back on the response that you heard from Marco there when he was talking about this, well, perhaps not special treatment, the debt needs to be repaid, perhaps a more gradual debt reduction, if there's something that you might want to respond to, or just generally from what you've heard, a comment, a beautiful nutshell comment that you may wish to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. So yes, I will start briefly by answering it to Monsieur Petit, and maybe make a quick point on the remark from Peter. So yeah, I understand that the system you build is really clever and allow, when member state present a plan, to only have to reduce its debt after a certain amount of time and give some leeway, and in it you present also investment reform. So in sense, it really look a lot like the proposal we made. The only fear I have, and it's not very clear, is it possible for member states to come and to propose a list of investment that will lead to 4% of deficit, but it's for a very clever and far-reaching green industrial policy to help the south of Italy, for example, to really develop. And you need not just a bit of money, not just a bit of deficit, but really something consistent. In this case, I have the impression that we are still bound by the limit of 3%. And so that, yes, the system is there, but missing the last point of taking some distance from this. So I also understand that before launching next deficit procedure, the Commission has to do an Article 126 report. They will check into relevant factor. Indeed, there is some part and some leeway to understand, and when deficits are there for investment and for the objective, plenty of things this relevant factor has been expanded at each reform. So there is some leeway before launching excessive deficit procedure, and it's good. But I don't know, it will still be enough to allow for some country to really do what's necessary to grow out of debt. Because,
Okay,
and then if
yeah.
I can directly go to the point of Peter, because it's related, you said that, yeah, there is always more need than money available. And on this, I'm not sure I totally agree on this. Of course, there is a finite amount of money too, but it's not defined by the fact that you are in deficit or not, or your debt to GDP. It's about the ability of the market, the capability to provide this funding. And this is more like, in some case, there is a level of gross financing need of state that can be too much for markets. But again, it depends who are your investor, if they're at national level or if they're abroad. There are many things that count in there. And so, as it's not really about debt to GDP, and the problem is not there, you can be at 100 or 200% debt to GDP with certain structure of debt and certain, let's say, institutional framework support of central banks, like the case of Japan, and have no problem in continuing to go in depth,
Can I allow you
following
to
what's
answer
needed.
that? I'm going to park that one. Just answer. Can you do a quick answer before I come to Mark over there? I would like to take the question from the audience, but a quick response to that, please, Peter.
Maybe, yeah, first of all, Japan and European Union are different cases. I think what levels public debt becomes problematic, it's dependent on many different factors, strength of economy as well. In Europe, with 27 countries together, we each has their own budgetary process and one single monetary policy. We have to converge. That's the thing we did for quite a while. Looking backwards, I think the debt crisis, the European sovereign debt crisis, taught us valuable lessons. It has shown that the fiscal position can worsen substantially. Member states may run into problems when investors lose confidence, and also when, we've seen recent turbulence in the United Kingdom as well. So I would say, be careful in this. And of course, I understand the need for investments. And when I take one step backwards, I think you showed in one of your first slides how much interest payments as percentage of GDP decreased in the couple of last years. And it could have been, for all the countries, a decision to use this money for investing. And I'm afraid that for almost none of the countries, the free fall of interest payment is used for investment. I'm afraid it's not used in the Netherlands either, but that could and should have been quite a way forward as well.
Can I stop you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
We can talk for ages.
There's I know, and it's so tricky. Sorry. No, go ahead. You want? Yeah. Let me just turn to the audience first, because it's just anyone else in the audience who will also have a question. So we're going to hear these three, keep them short, try not to ask them to the whole panel, or at least if you do, I'm only going to select one or two of you. Yeah. Okay. In a moment. So first of all, over to this lovely lady here, please, in the scarf. Hang on a minute. Just take your mic. And of course, do please say who you are and to whom your question is addressed.
Yes, Sorcha Edwards from Housing Europe. So we're representing the social, public and cooperative housing bodies across Europe. They're investing approximately 50 billion annually in new build and obviously renovation. And depending on how clever they've been in adapting their system, some are actually struggling with deficit rules because a lot of their investment is on balance sheet. And obviously we can clearly see, let's say, the added value of having an adequate energy efficient home, particularly at the moment, the impact that would have on the local economy. So I would like to maybe just get some advice, maybe from Peter, because I think this question goes in a similar vein to Ludovic. So you're talking about the industrial reform that is needed, because in housing, we really do need massive investment.
Okay.
Maybe
Perfect.
just slightly to add to that, because the comment from our Erasmus Andres and what this means to the man on the street, because Obviously, in the last decade, we've seen massive private investment in homes, up to 600 billion in 1 year in the last decade, went to 1 trillion in the top 100 cities globally in existing real estate. So it's this contrast. How do we explain that to citizens? We have limits on investment, and at the same time we have
Thank you,
massive
because
private
you're actually preempting a question that I did want to anyway come to Rasmus, a link in terms of, you said, you know, if you go out into the street to, you know, nobody's going to know what a 3% is, but for all of these big issues, particularly on social infrastructure, particularly on housing, particularly on all of those key areas, where is civil society's involvement too in all of the conversation about the governance, you know, the reform of the governance framework? So thank you for that. Hold that thought a moment, Peter. That's perhaps one for you and others, but hold that thought. I cannot get to everybody. Okay. 2 other questions, please. We had a question here from this gentleman here.
Thank you. Markus Trilling with Greenpeace. I have a question to the whole panel. Why did none of you dare to read out loud the writing on the wall that austerity regimes are looming back? Is it because you think Italy, for example, will have a 5% growth rate? Do you think inflation will do the job? Or do you think really the current energy crisis, war in Europe, is the last crisis and governments can lean back, market will fix it? So how do you see this?
Thank you very much. We had a third question that came over here. I think the lady at the back there. Thank you very much. And again, say who you are. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Sarah Murawski. I work for the Sustainable Finance Lab based in the Netherlands. Thanks for this awesome panel and for the opportunity to ask a question. My question will be addressed to Mr. Bouty. Recently, like 5 days ago, there was a report published on behalf of the Econ Committee, or requested by the Econ Committee. It was written by a former Commission employee. And he says that the Commission's communication on the governance review implies 2 things. And one is that there is more need for debt finance investments. So that means we need to accept that there will be permanently more debt finance investments. And secondly, that this also implies that there's a need for more centralized finance, which means fiscal capacity. Do you agree with this reading? If not, why not?
Thank you very much. I'm going to pass to you first, actually, Rasmus, to come back, because you've been most Sphinx-like. And by the way, nobody gets the bottle of champagne unless you consider those very long 4-sentence questions. But I understand, and you're all super smart, and it's very, very difficult, and you need to make your points. But Rasmus, I mean, this issue, I mean, particularly the investment that now these housing associations are needing to do in Europe. There's a real struggle with the deficit rules, and just, I mean, in general, this issue of, this is all for the citizen. We've heard about a call to make things more mission driven, more mission oriented. What are your thoughts?
Yes. Now, let me first of all say to the champagne issue, as a member of the parliament, we have some problems with colleagues not declaring gifts. So I would also prefer to speak a bit more and not to get any gifts here tonight, but just no, so we agree on this, actually. No, I just want to say that, like, I mean, I fully agree with some of the last speakers from the audience, because also we can have a closer look on what actually happened in the 90s when you're looking on when actually the Stability and Growth Pact, but also the debate took over on public budgets also in the member state, what actually happened. And I think the housing sector is a very, very good or sad example for this, because the housing sector is one where privatization and financialization, actually my group in the parliament made a very, very great interesting study about this as well, led to enormous consequences we can see, ending up in really big social problems when it comes to the housing sector in a lot of countries in Europe, in a lot of bigger cities, but as it is now, not just like bigger cities like Berlin or I don't know, bigger other cities in Europe, but also in smaller cities. This is already starting, and especially the ones where private companies are running the game. Let's put it like this. And in there where like there is more public housing, still social housing, the situation is much better. And one of the reasons for why this also needs to be addressed in this panel or in the context context of the Stability and Growth Pact is, of course, that if we are sticking to some tough rules there, and this is what will happen if there are not like some parts we can exclude from the rules, then we will maybe end up in a situation where we are facing big cuts again in national budgets, in public budgets, and then of course this can also lead to social cuts we had seen in some of the member states hardest hit by the financial crisis some years ago. So this is very important. So thanks for mentioning this. And for me, this is also a bit of an example for what you mentioned, Markus, on the austerity issue, because this is an example for it. And what I wanted to say, but maybe I forgot in my initial statement, is that we shouldn't end up with a situation where austerity will dominate public finance in Europe again. And this can be addressed on different examples. And I really think that we also had learned the lessons of this, but I'm afraid of that some of the reform is falling too short. So I don't think, like talking to the Commission, talking to others, also to some of the member states maybe more in favor of this, would like to see the same consequences, because there like in 2009, 2010, because there had been a lot of research that actually the way like Europe dealt with the crisis at that time were terrible, and even made the situation not like socially harder, but also economically harder. But on the other side, if we are not ready to address this in a broader way and a more ambitious understanding, then maybe we will fail again. Not because we are like missing, the understanding is lacking like maybe 10 years ago, but because we don't have a majority, or the ambition is not high enough. And this is what I'm really afraid of, and why I think we still need to like push in this direction within the institutions, but also in the public debate.
Thank you so much. And you know what, I've been so unintentionally, I have not come back to you, Agnes, which is actually so not what I do as a moderator. So I'm going to come to you next. Very important that you get to speak. And thank you for that, because it does sort of echo, or does speak to this kind of stalemate that exists between those countries that have got more call for flexibility and those who are more concerned about debt sustainability, and this kind of sticking point there and where things might be. Am I allowed to ask you to come back on that one first? This issue of, you know, are we at this real, surely we're at risk of austerity reforms looming? And please do come back if there's one other point that you would like to respond to that you have heard or heard from your fellow speakers. Let me just give you a bit of space to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to bring a more positive note into this discussion. I think in Europe we have a great asset, which is that we have excess savings today, and these savings can be used. And the transition obviously needs to rely massively on private spending, not on public spending. It needs to, otherwise it won't work. And so there is a question, of course, there is a question also of moving from maybe less consumption toward more investment. But on the whole, I'm not too pessimistic about how aggregate demand is going to evolve, because we have these needs and there is these savings that can be used to finance these needs. Now, there's of course a debate about public-private division of work. Probably the public sector needs to be much more targeted in its interventions. It's not just funding, it's also regulation, pricing, carbon pricing, and all this that can have massive effects on the private sector. Of course, there's need for compensation of low-income households, and also to help firms to make this transition. Hence, I'm talking about targeting. But if I look at social housing in my country, social housing is in a much better shape than private housing in terms of energy efficiency. The buildings are more efficient than the private sector. So it's more a question of subsidizing some private renovation rather than a huge problem for social housing. And social housing on aggregate, the return is not bad at all. So it's also a question of the regulation of this housing. It can be also private social housing. So I think it's country specific, and we need to go into the details. So I would not say, I think saying that the public sector needs to finance the transition is just saying that it won't happen. So we need to be very, very careful about that. And I'm not too pessimistic about austerity. And so it's more a reallocation from private, public, from different sectors. It's more a reallocation issue. It's a big issue than a question of aggregate demand.
Thank you very much. Can I prevail? Are you fine if we go till 6:10? We did start a bit late. Are you okay with that? Yeah, you've got the energy to just hear a little bit. And of course, we have not even delved into everything. Let me come to Peter there, and not least we had a third. I mean, there was also a call about the housing issue and the question, which we've heard from the French perspective. Perhaps we can hear now from the Dutch perspective. And then there was also the question that came that there has been this paper, there's been more need for debt finance investments, perhaps something central, fiscally speaking. Perhaps you could give your thoughts on that as well, those two questions. Thank you.
I think regarding housing, and that's one of the examples that a lot of the decisions are specific, country specific. I completely agree. And it's difficult to organize all these issues top down from Brussels. And maybe that's one of the good parts of the communication by the Commission, which really gives possibilities to country to come with their own specific plans. And in each of the countries, there are choices to be made, either in the green transition, but also on education. And I am convinced education is as important for the future as all the other topics we discussed. And I also know that that's are not real investments in the sense that by pure taxonomy, we can say this is an investment. So that makes always me a little bit hesitant to go to these green golden rules, or what sort of golden rules you can imagine. European fiscal capacity, I think, yes, you said the right thing. If that would be on table with this communication as well, it would be, I can't believe it, there would be a solution before the summer. It would be long discussions. And I think that's, we need to do the economic governance review. And as I said, we should go faster. I am happy that you didn't put too much on the boat that it would sink. So thank you for that as well.
First of all, Rasmus, you wanted to come in, and then Marco, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, and just very briefly, but I just would like to say that my feeling is that it's too easy to argue that the housing issue is a national issue. Of course, like, it's not the European Commission putting a framework forward addressing the housing crisis in Europe, but there are some developments and some needs I think we can see in close to all countries in Europe. We have a problem when it comes to housing, when you're looking on the present situation, the situation that people don't have the cost of living crisis also linked to housing, where I think you can see some developments going on in a lot of cities, that bigger financial corporations actually are getting into the markets, got into the markets in the past, and this is like a trend, yeah, we can see in many cities. And if this is like a global trend, we can see in Amsterdam, like we can see it in Berlin, then and we can see global corporations operating at a global level, then this also needs to be addressed at European level. And I really think that the member states could do much more to support this as well. And the second one is on the investment needs. No matter if you have like a social housing crisis, or if you just have a green investment gap when it comes to housing, you need to spend money on this, and you need also public money on this, because we know from many studies that this will just be addressed if there is like public spending, and then of course private spending needs to be additional on the public spending, but this is how it works, and this means that you also need to have room for maneuver to address this and to spend. So you can spend money on this, and then we have some countries in Europe where this is easier possible because there is still fiscal space, like Germany, for example, but maybe also other countries with a bit of speaking time here today. And there are other countries where there is no fiscal space linked to the common rules we are dealing with in Europe, and they need to get the space. And this is where I really think that the housing one still is a good example. And that's, from my understanding, it's too easy to argue for that this is like a national topic because there are some elements on it at European level as well.
Let me just say, giving you, it's 18:03. I know Marco wants to come in. I have one more question on transparency and on civil society, and they can just be, because I don't want to miss those two. And then I'm going to ask for a last word, which is to complete a sentence, and I can release you all in 10 minutes for drinks and finger foods, which is just ridiculous. I mean, canapes. Over to you, Marco. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Telegraphic, austerity. We will come to austerity if we leave it to the market. Now, markets operate along horizontal and vertical lines. So we go from benign neglect to Armageddon. It is in the interest of more fragile countries, actually, to have credible and enforceable rules, because they give a pointer to the markets, and we can, as I said, implement a strategy of fiscal retrenchment without going back to the austerity that we experienced during the global financial crisis. I personally think it's an illusion to think that we do everything via the denominator, not adjusting the numerator being the deficit essentially, and the denominator being the GDP. I think we can work on both sides. Recovering adequate, moderate level of primary surpluses, I think is essential after the, and I think this will come. It will not be excessively hard because of the swelling the deficit. A lot comes from subsidies, which hopefully will prove temporary, not permanent. So this is, I think, and what we come forward with. That's why it is important. I think Peter mentioned it before. After the General Escape closed, we have a framework which is going to be in the interest really of everybody, but mainly countries which are potentially more under threat from the market. Second point is more debt financed investment. I think
keep it really nutshell if you can.
No, in a nutshell, absolutely. So I think there, yes, and the idea was, to have a more gradual debt reduction is behind that. I think more centralized investment, I expressed myself before. I can only conclude on the issue of, I think Agnes mentioned, private investment. And here, if you think about the kind of investment that we need for the green and for the digital transition, these are investments which are typically long in ideas and short in collateral. So it means that we need capital market union, private equity to finance them. And here, capital market union, fundamental in order to foster the reallocation of resources towards this kind of investment. Banks cannot do that on their own.
Can I just stay with you just for a last one, please? And again, please, just 3 points, because it has come in and I don't want to ignore the online audience. So thank you for this one. The criticism of the old economic governance framework wasn't just on the macroeconomic side, it was on the transparency. We've heard about that. And the, what do you want to call it? The governance, the democracy. 3 sentences, 3 ways, or if you can't express it like that, because that's far too facile, just very short. How does the Commission plan to ensure that oversight, that democratic oversight, which I'm sure the Parliament also, is very important? How do you ensure that? There is a call for it. There is a demand.
I try to give, I will give a technocratic answer here. The fact that we have a more bottom-up process with discussions and presentation of national plans. I think that would help a lot. I think we are going to empower more independent fiscal institutions at the national level to have more oversight and more transparency. I think the kind of discussion that one would have in Parliament, but across the society, I think would be very important. And I think the fact that we have multiple objectives on the positive side and not only on the disciplinarian side, I think should help to to have more involvement of public opinion in general.
Thank you very much. I'm going to park it there because I can hear glasses clinking. I'm sure you all need to get your hands on something cold and hopefully alcoholic. I did want to say more. Let me just tell you, that if we had had more time, I would love to have talked more about, this point that you brought out, Ludo, this climate related fiscal risk to be included. So there isn't just that short termism, and also strengthening the role of the IFIs. Perhaps that could be something you'd said to me beforehand, listen, Kat, the IFIs are there, but they're much more robust in certain countries like the Netherlands than they are in others. But perhaps that's really something to put in their remits, to put in their heads. I wanted to look a bit more on enforcement procedures, but I was told that then we wouldn't get out of here probably before midnight. So I didn't. Certainly, I wanted to look a bit more, explore in depth. And what I did here is this quality as opposed to quantity, being a more effective approach. Again, that was something that came out in your position paper, the Greens, this framework that doesn't focus only on the quantity of spending and borrowing from a very narrow accounting perspective, but instead assesses its quality. And I think that's something very much that Ludo, you brought out. Peter, you said the European Fiscal Board should be given a larger role to improve the checks and balances at EU level. That was another one we didn't have time to explore too much. And also the absolute importance, you just touched upon it there, Marco, of not just civil society involvement, because, hey, we are talking about benefits, infrastructures, investments in all of that is beneficial for me, for you, for the European taxpayer, for the average citizen. So civil society involvement, but also national parliament involvement. And sometimes it's not so easy having those conversations. And sometimes those conversations, as we know, are very split and contentious. So many different areas. Now it's half a sentence. So please prove to me you can do this. Here you go. I want you to complete this sentence and I can release these good people for some alcohol. A European economic governance framework fit for the future, but I think we can all agree that those future challenges are now. So we can possibly take out the word future challenges. A European economic governance framework fit for the future challenges that are already here must focus upon. Now, you talked about your areas, the difficult about the cyclical bias, the unrealistic pace of the debt reduction, enforcement issues, not enough ownership. What do you think of all of those sort of challenges that Marco cited right at the beginning? If you had to complete that half sentence, that governance framework fit for the future has to focus on, in half a sentence, what is most important for you?
Climate and social investments.
Okay. Everybody else has to hit that bar of conciseness. Next to you. Yes, but he won't give you champagne for it if you agree. Go on.
No, I really think that the national ownership is extremely important in each of the countries, and within the national ownership, quite the combination of plans, investment, reforms can be done. And I have to say for us that sustainability is necessary. Without that, we could have big problems on other sides later on as well.
Thank you very much. That was an uncustomarily long Dutch sentence, but okay. Half an hour. Well, the French might be. Yeah. Hey, I have a French husband, so I might. Yeah. Go on then. Half a sentence.
So, I agree, and sustainability, I agree too. I think that it's a comprehensive notion that includes, of course, climate sustainability, but it also includes macro sustainability. I try to put my idea back. And I think it's a case. So there are different types of crises that could hit, and we need to balance all these crises and to find the way to avoid all of them. And this is the challenge. And the good news is that the investment needs is large, but it's not something absolutely immense. So it's a few % of GDP. This is something we can do.
Thank you very much. Ludo, for you. So European Economic Governance Framework fit for the future challenges that frankly are already here has to focus on what is most important for you. Oh, wow.
I have so
Speechless,
many, I
speechless,
so
I
many
did not
things.
expect.
Let's say refine the view of debt sustainability, understand that debt to GDP is not always an issue, that financial market, in fact, are craving for more debt, but because they play the role of safe asset. And so there's not that much risk of lacking funding, and therefore accept to recreate the space for more politics, to open the space for more clever investment. In the end, there is no rule that will allow to control everything. You need in the end to have some assessment by the Commission and then a decision of Finance Ministry maybe to allow for more investment that maybe will be upon 3 or 4 or 5%. But if it's what's needed for long-term goal, let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure you'll get a round of applause, Marco, but go for it. Just try, keep it short. Sorry, I didn't mean that. I jest.
Okay, repeat.
Go on.
So I have to complete.
So this new framework, fit for future challenges, has to focus. What's the most important thing? Do you think of all of those things that we need to really focus upon? And you said there were those 6 key challenges. What do you think we really need to tackle?
I think we'll have to focus on sustainability. And that sustainability means fiscal, means environmental, and means social. And I think as I mentioned at the beginning, you have potential trade-offs in the short term, but these 3 sustainabilities actually are complements in the longer term. That's what we should do.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I was actually wondering when you said how happy you were, Marco, about the consensus, and you said we can all go and eat cake in a room. I thought, Jesus Christ, they won't have a consensus on the cake they have to eat. That I'm absolutely sure of. We've got the Dutch, we've got the French, we've got the Italians, certainly not the Germans. So thank you very much. Can you please give a warm round of applause to these very eloquent speakers? Thank you very much. May I give, before you leave, a shout out to Eva. Thank you very much, Eva van den Rat. And we've had lovely Ludo at Finance Watch, who has been very, very fundamental in the orchestration of this event, but also 2 behind the scenes that you might want to chat to. Raise your hands. We have over there the lovely Sebastian at New Economics Foundation, and Anton also at Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung. Thank you very much. Thanks to the technical team here. Thank you so much to you. Thank you for coming in this freezing cold. Thank you for listening so well. Thank you to all of you online. And now eat, drink, and be merry. And don't forget to tweet. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.